Really want to thank our friends at the Montgomery County Department or the Office of Drug and Alcohol. They have sponsored us being here with you tonight, and we've worked together for about 4 years now, and we just love the partnership and want to thank them very much for their support. We are a nonprofit, so we do rely on the support of donors like you, so thanks. So for our program tonight, I'm going to stop my share, and now you can see all of our panelists this evening. I'll just tell you a little bit about who's with us, and then we'll let Troy get us started. You're going to hear first from Troy Jackson. Troy is a clinician who's worked with adolescents and young adults in the Philadelphia region for many years, and he's going to help us to understand how we can prepare our kids to launch. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience as a parent who thought I did what I needed to help my kids launch. And then you'll hear from my son, Daniel. I'm really grateful that he is joining us. So he's going to share his journey as a teen and young adult. He's 31 now, so it's been kind of a nice journey. Finally, we have a newly minted clinician named Hayden Briggs, who has spent this past several years working with adolescents and young adults in this area. And he'll share his thoughts on this topic as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Troy Jackson. Thanks so much for being here, Troy.
There you go. I'm unmuted. All right. Well, I want to say thank you, and I welcome everybody here that's here tonight. And thank you, Kim, for having me. I really appreciate it. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Troy Jackson. I'm a licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania. I currently work at Ethos Treatment with substance abuse IOP. Also have a private practice. And it's an honor to be here tonight, but I want some of you as parents or caregivers to take a moment and just, I know you hear this all the time, take it easy, relax. Don't think because you have a child or emerging adult right now in a kind of dire straits that there's no solutions, there's no answers. There's help out there. So I want you to take some of this information, not get overwhelmed, but just go, hey, listen, we can figure this out. You can figure this out, all right? So keep that in mind as you hear the things that are being presented tonight, all right? It's not the end of the world. You can figure this out, all right? What I want to do is give maybe a kind of overview of how I would approach something, how I have suggested parents handle situations, all right? And again, remember, this is very suggestive. Like, there's no right way of doing this. There can be some wrong ways, but there's no real right way of doing it. So I want you to think from a framework of being inventive when you're approaching a child, a young man or woman, how to help them the best way you know how. One of the first things I want to talk about is collecting data. And what I mean by that is, all of you know this, children never lie to their parents, right? Let's be for real here, right? Let's start with that fact. They never lie. They're always telling you the truth, what's going on with them. Everything's crystal clear, right? Not. That's not true. So one of our jobs, our roles are to find out what's really going on with the child in question or the emerging adult in question. And sometimes that takes a little conversation, that takes a little brain work. And one of the things I like to always suggest, is get help. Be part of the conversation. Different organizations will tell you, what are the signs of a kid is abusing drugs? What are the signs if there's depression, anxiety, and substance abuse or alcohol? You can always rely on someone to maybe educate you or teach you the things that you need to know to try to gather enough information and data without snooping or anything like that, but you really feel sound that you know what's going on with your young man or young woman in your life, all right? That makes sense, okay? That's one of the things you want to do because you don't want to go into this, how would you say, reactive, all right? You want to respond, all right? You want to respond in a healthy way because remember, you are the parent, you are the caregiver. Like my mother is 95 years old, believe it or not. I'm 57. My mom is still my parent. You know what I mean? To the day I leave this planet, she does too. You are their parent, you are their caregiver if you can be in any way, shape, or form. So you want to be informed before you make any type of snap judgments, right? So that's one of the first things you want to do. Two, you want to also, let me see, how do I frame this? If it's two parents involved in the home, you want to create an alliance. And what I mean is, you don't want mom to be the heavy, you don't want dad to be the heavy. If there's a double same-sex family, same as issue. You don't want either partner to be the heavy, okay? You want both of you to come together when you do approach a child about an issue or an emerging adult, all right? Now, suppose you're a single parent. Fine, no problem. You can still get help from outside sources. You can talk to someone. You might even, as a suggestion, employ, or not employ, but rather reach out for help from another family member, like an aunt or uncle, or someone that the child in question has a strong alliance to. But remember, if you do something like that, you want to be the one driving the bus, okay? You don't want the uncle or aunt or family member to come in and try to swoop anything down, because some parents feel overwhelmed, single parents doing this alone. Sometimes you might have to get help from another family member who might have been a caregiver of that child at one point in time. But again, you want to be basically the person driving the boat, right? That's one thing I want to think about. Then I want to move to this, where it gets kind of sticky. So you got your information, you have your alliance, you're ready to approach the child about what's going on to really communicate with what you think could be a possible problem or is already a known problem. This is where the crossroads comes. And this is where you have to be really inventive. The reason why I say that is because what if you get pushback, right? Remember, kids don't listen to their parents. We know it. Let's not act like they do, right? It's this idea of, like, one of the questions was, am I being preachy as a parent when I approach a child? Yes, you're being preachy because you're their parent. Parents are always preachy. Usually, most of the times, that's the way children kind of hear what a parent is saying. I'm sorry, but we all have had parents. Most of us are caregivers, and we know we don't want to hear what they have to say readily. So you can probably expect some pushback. But with that being said, talk to them with what I like to call compassion and empathy, right? You know what I mean? Like, any conversation you want to have, you know, you got to keep in mind, like, I don't know what that young man or that young woman's going through. I don't know. And I can't make these harsh judgments, these harsh attacks, or I can't come at them too fast, because it could be substance abuse. It could be substance abuse coupled with a lot of different other issues that you may not know about. So try to be really empathetic and try to be compassionate. That doesn't mean that you can be empathetic and compassionate without holding boundaries. All right? You can still hold boundaries. There's a saying, so it's not an original thought. And if I'm yelling, I'm sorry. Sometimes when I'm talking to electronic devices, I tend to yell. I don't know if anybody else does that. So I just get like, you know, I think like the microphone's not working for some reason. It drives my girlfriend crazy, right? But the point I'm saying is, sometimes, like, you know, when you're being empathetic and you're compassionate with it, you know, the boundary isn't necessarily a punishment. You know what I mean? Discipline is there to teach us. It's not there to be a punishment. And I think a lot of people think that discipline, or rather just a boundary, is a punishment. No, boundaries are there for us to learn from our mistakes, to develop new skills, to find out other ways of doing things that we may have not discovered on our own. You know, again, as a parent, you're a teacher, all right? You're a caregiver. You're a lot of things to that child in question. So there's a lot of different roles that you might have to take on. So I practice jujitsu, and I always like to think about that, right? In jujitsu, we have this saying, because like you're choking each other out, or you're arm barring each other out, you're getting your butt kicked by a man or a woman. We have this saying, there's winning and there's learning. Not winning and losing. There's winning and learning. Sometimes I like to use that same example when we're dealing with family issues, right? There's winning, and then there's like learning. Not losing. You're always in the fight. You're always in the battle, because, hey, as long as you're here with your family, there's always something to adjust or change, if that makes sense, right? So when I was talking about the crossroads, it comes the time of talking to the young man or young woman about what's going on, or how can you help them. And that really is where you start to create what's known as somewhat of an alliance. And again, don't expect it to be easy all the time. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, because me and Kim had talked about this briefly like a week ago, some of you parents out there are dealing with young men and women with marijuana issues. You got to remember, even as a clinician, it is one of the hardest drugs to have someone stop, because of the climate of our country, the legislation has been put out, and the readily availability of it. So don't feel as though you're a complete failure if that's one of the substances you have to battle with one of your children. It's very difficult for me as a clinician to actually have a client buy into the idea that maybe this drug is harming them, because everything they hear outside of what mom is saying, dad is saying, or someone in an authoritative figure is the exact opposite. You know what I mean? Exact opposite. You know, you've heard the story. Well, it's legal. What's the big deal? You know, what's the big deal? We hear that all the time. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So once you do make a conversation, or you do engage a conversation with your young child or man or emerging adult or woman, Have some resources. You know what I mean? Like when I say that, like suppose the young man or woman says, hey, you know what, mom, dad, I want to get some help. I want to try to do this. Have something in your mind that you can direct them to or push them to, whether it be a website, whether it be an actual treatment facility, whether it be a therapist. I strongly suggest a lot of times for parents when they don't know what they're doing in these type of situations to get counseling for themselves. There's nothing wrong with getting help for yourself at all to find out, how do I handle this, right? That goes back to creating a strong alliance, whether with a family member or a professional. One of the things I find a lot that happens sometimes with parents that have very successful careers, they get into this mindset that like, no, not me. I'm a very successful lawyer. I'm a very successful plumber, whatever you may be and you're successful at. They tend to think, how could I be a bad parent? Well, it's not being a bad parent. It's just maybe there's a disconnect with communication with the young man or woman. There's maybe something that you're missing. So always think, hey, there's nothing wrong with getting help, to how to really approach this at all. And again, you got to deflate the ego when you're talking to a young man or young woman about these issues, because you are not the expert on your child. You might think you are. We hope we are, but you're not the expert. So you got to keep that in mind, and say, hey, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. I got to really think about that sometimes. All right. Something else I wanted to share with you when I was talking about boundaries. I hear this a lot. Think of it, how would you react if your mother or father is telling you not to drink, but then the 4th of July comes up, or a family event or a wedding or occasion, you say it's okay for them to drink. It's very, very confusing. If you say you don't want the child to drink or smoke, you can't do it either. Now, sorry, it sounds like I may be lecturing some of you parents. I'm not. I'm just trying to say some of the pitfalls that I see happen when I'm in this kind of work. You'll see a parent. I had a parent. It was amazing how they were real staunch about the young man not drinking, but if they went to an event or something with another family member, oh, it was okay. Doesn't go over too well. Sends out a very, very confusing message, to say the least, right? Another fact I want to share with you, not a fact, but suggestion, try to keep your word, right? No one does not like anyone that doesn't keep their word. And what I mean by that, as a parent, as a boundary setter, as sometimes a disciplinarian, it depends, and a caregiver, if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. Now, I give you an example. Once I had a parent saying, Troy, if he uses again, I'm going to ship him off to rehab. I had to be that guy and say, no, you're not. And she started laughing and she said, you're right, I'm not. So, if you're not ready to have a child go to treatment, if you're not ready to take the car away or the phone or anything of like that nature, don't threaten with it. You know what I mean? Try to build leverage in another way that's more alliance oriented rather than threatening, if that makes sense. Okay. Try to create that alliance more than attacking. All right. And the reason why I guess I'm saying these things in a kind of like prescriptive way is I think there's a lot of people out there that don't really have a blueprint or an idea on what or how they should handle these situations. So I'm just trying to give an overview of some of the things that I think could possibly work at different times. You got to be inventive too. You know what I mean? You got to try things not the same way that you might have tried, because evidently those ways of approaching your child or creating an alliance with them aren't really working. So you have to be more inventive. With that being said, please don't be the person that works harder than your child to fix the to fix the problem. A lot of times when you're dealing with an emergent adult, mothers and fathers or same-sex parents will pour money into the child. It's okay to help the child have their needs covered, but you don't have to always cover their wants. You want them to feel comfortable in what they're doing. You follow me? You want them to feel some safety, even if they're 25 years old, even if they're 24 years old. Those ages aren't really, think about, for some of you that are older than that, I presume in this group, you're older than 24, right? You know what I mean? It's not hard at that. It's kind of hard at that age to figure things out. So they need your help, but you have to really decide on what's too much and what's too little. You know what I mean? But always try to err on, make sure their basic needs are met so they can thrive and grow in any way possible, if that makes sense, right? A few more things. I got a few more minutes, Kim. Okay. Yes. Okay. Um, sorry, just bear with me. One of the questions too came in was, how can I be effective carrying my values without being preachy? I kind of mentioned that earlier. And one of the things about that is, again, you're always going to be preachy, right? Whatever you hear a child say, right? But also, like, sometimes you maybe have to use an example. What I mean is, maybe use an example with the young man or woman that you're trying to approach about a certain issue, of how you overcame something, but not comparing in a way that's pejorative or shaming. Something very distant, something very innocuous, something very easy. Maybe like talk to them about that so they can feel something like, hey, you know what? My mom or dad's being vulnerable. You know what I mean? Like, my caregiver's being vulnerable too. So wait a minute, I'm not the only one that's had this problem. So you create a real healthy alliance where they feel more comfortable to trust you because you're showing a vulnerability that you're asking them to show. One of the things that's really interesting, I find, even as a therapist, and I'm trying to take care of someone, is, remember, a lot of times humans can't be honest with themselves, right? We don't want to look at things. So why should I be honest with you like that? It just doesn't work that way. So we got to keep that in mind, all right? Like, sometimes people just don't throw things out there. One other thing is too, another question that came in was 3 things that would help an emerging adult. Man, that was kind of a hard question because I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Because there's so much information out there. So I was like, man, let me think of some things. And these are things that came to my mind about that question. Very good question. One, talked about their needs being covered already. Make sure their needs are covered, right? If it's reasonable, you can afford it, or in any way, shape, or form, just help them to some degree, but don't carry them. Teach them responsibility. 2, right? Try not to compare yourself generationally. And what I mean is, well, back in my day, or when I was your age, no one wants to hear that. I've heard it, you've heard it. No one wants to hear a comparison like that. It's not about you, it's about them. It's 2020, it's not 1965 or 64 or 63. It's a different landscape. So when you ever do make a comparison or you pass a judgment, don't do the generational thing. It does not work. You become a boomer or whatever generation you are, and they just shut down. They don't want to hear a word you got to say, right? 3 rather. Last thing I think that also helps with emerging adults is, this is one of my favorites. Do not make your child a carbon copy of you, okay? You are not a bot maker. You are not trying to 3D print them or anything like that. Suppose your family has been in the farming business for 20 years. That's fine. Your son and daughter wants to become a writer and pay their own bills. Let them become a writer. You know, we all want our children to be happy, right? In emerging adulthood, there's a lot of decision making. There's a lot of career changes. Most people don't stay at the same job for the same length of time. So don't make them a carbon copy of you. I don't care if every person in your family was an attorney. It doesn't mean they have to be an attorney. You say from day one when you have a child, you're going to be supportive. Well, it doesn't stop when they're 25, okay? Help them find their dreams. And one last thing, when you do talk to your child, whenever you talk to them, the magic word, thank you. You know what I mean? Thank you. You know, thank your child for opening up to you. Thank your child for being vulnerable. You know what I mean? Acknowledge the fact that they're trying. They're doing something a little different. So thank you goes a long way. Just because you're the parent doesn't mean you don't deserve to give them a thank you. All right? That's about it, Kim. I'm sorry if I went over a little bit, but I just wanted to throw a lot out in a fast time. Again, I apologize for my intensity, because sometimes I yell. So forgive me, and thank you for letting me be here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Troy. That was really awesome. I added some notes to my notes, so I'm gonna read my notes because I want to keep on track. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my family, and I have to tell you in full disclosure that not only is Daniel a panelist, but my ex-husband and daughter are on as attendees. So how grateful am I that we have this kind of family? So I'm very filled with gratitude right now. But basically, I have 2 children. My son, who's with us tonight, Daniel, is 31, and our daughter is 28. She lives in California. Daniel lives in Colorado. they have launched in a really beautiful and amazing way. But we have to spin back the time a little bit here and talk about where we started out. So their dad is a physician. I was a graphic designer. I still am, I guess, but I worked as a graphic designer. I worked from home. So I was at home when they came home from school pretty much. I was there. It was that kind of idyllic setting. I was a room parent. I was the home and school co-president, very involved and active. Today, I'm the executive director of this organization. I'm a certified family recovery specialist. And all that started because of what we all experienced about 10 years ago when our son found recovery, and I learned an awful lot about this disease and everything that comes with it as a family member. So, I'm talking about the perspective of the parent who's been in the dark. I was absolutely in the dark as far as understanding substance use. I had opinions about things. I might have had a little bit of my own personal experience, but I had really no knowledge or understanding. And what I've learned today in doing this work is not having conversations when our children were very young, from an early age, just not having them. That kind of sin of an omission is that they didn't hear that this is at least an important topic. No matter, how, deftly you handle this kind of conversation, I think it's so important to at least make it clear that it's important to us that you understand substance use, whether you can manage it or not, could lead to problems if you start, at an early age. We just never really had any of those kinds of conversations. Why some people use substances and others don't, all that sort of thing. Another thing I learned is my kids have a lot of opportunity to make friends in their life. They don't have a lot of opportunities for parents. In our case, they had two parents, and we could certainly be loving and affectionate and close and really connected to our kids, and yet have give them structure and show them what accountability looks like. And I loved everything you said, Troy, about being on the same page, that unified front. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but it was really well said, that we just really need to, that consistency and follow through, when we make these veiled threats that we really don't mean and all that sort of thing. It's just not effective parenting. So another thing I wish I knew then was, when it's clear that my child is struggling, I need to ask for help. And again, as you said, Troy, the help might be for me, so looking at not even, it's hard for us as parents to really have an objective perspective on our child's behaviors. We're not therapists, even if we aren't therapists, and I'm not, never was, but even if we were, we just get clouded by our parenting, the fact that we love this person so much that it really can cloud our view of what's really happening. And as you said too, Troy, that projecting, like, well, when I was their age, I'm not you. You have a different psyche than I do. We're different people. So I think that's so important. But not just noticing their behaviors and their any signs of drug use or whatever it might be. What are my behaviors? Am I making excuses for them? Am I lying on their behalf or rationalizing? I did plenty of that when my son kind of was going in this direction. And, with all the involvement that I had in my kids' lives when they were young, which I loved having that, but with all that having been said, what I knew, here's what I knew about my son's substance use. I knew for the first time that he got high, the first time I knew that he got high was when he was 18. He was a senior in high school. And I thought that was a solitary incident. You're going to hear a different story. Just before he went off to college, I found, I was helping him pack. And when we were in his room, somewhere along the lines, I found a pipe, not the kind of pipe that my dad puffed on, another kind of pipe. And that fear came up for me. The second I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I thought we nipped this in the bud, and it just scared me so much. But he was off to college. So that's a question that I know comes up a lot for parents. Like, where's the litmus test for, is this the right thing now to send them off to school? And Michael, my ex-husband and I talked about this many times. Like, would we have done anything different? Probably not at that moment. we really didn't know beyond what I just explained to you. You know, we really didn't know a lot about what was going on. We were worried and we were not happy about it. We were concerned, but you know, off he went to college. He had problems his freshman year. And when he was no longer allowed to stay in university housing, I got on a plane, flew to Tucson to help him find an apartment so he could finish out his year. Again, I wanted to keep him on track. I didn't want him to have to leave school, all that sort of stuff. We want our kids to, you know, meet our expectations, society's expectations. When he was home for spring break, I helped him find community service that he needed to do. I set it up for him. These are, what I'm describing is snowplow parenting, right? So he has consequences, he has ramifications because of some early substance use, or what I thought was early substance use, and I'm trying to fix everything because we don't want to see our kids in pain. I feel like if I see him in pain, then it's going to get worse. Whatever's going on with him is just going to get worse. So I got to like run around, as my friend Pam says, with the pillows so that when he's falling, I'm catching him and making the landing softer. But guess what? He was not happy. He was in pain anyway. And I really feel I was contributing to that pain because by repairing things and fixing things, and he can absolutely talk more about this, I feel that I kind of robbed him of some opportunities to be accountable. You know, I took that away from him. So we did take our son to see a therapist, and we took him to see someone who treats mood and anxiety disorders. This therapist, my daughter gave me permission to say something about this. This was her therapist because she does not have a substance use disorder. She has a mood and anxiety disorder. So she was seeing her. We had a great relationship with this woman. So Daniel agreed to go and see her. But because she didn't have a specialty in substance use disorders, because we were not ready to see that that was a big issue at that point in his life, we took him to the wrong person. She's a perfectly good clinician for what she does, but she basically, you know, completely acknowledged that what he was doing, he was remorseful. She said to Michael and myself, who Daniel allowed us to come in after they met, and she said, come on, didn't you guys get high in college, you know? And so she was basically telling us we were overreacting, believed everything that Daniel said, because as Troy said, our kids never lie, you know? So, you know, again, a lesson learned is if you see something going on with your child that would require in any other instance, a specialist, some medical condition that scares you enough that you're like, you know what, we better take him or her to a dermatologist or to a this or to a that, a specialist who understands and maybe would rule out a worst case scenario. I think we're so afraid to look for a therapist on psychology.com or whatever it is, where it says addiction disorders or, you know, substance use disorders, addiction, that sort of thing. Don't be afraid of that, please, because that person's going to have a much deeper understanding of what's driving the substance use than someone who doesn't have that background. So just to kind of fast forward, after his second year at the University of Arizona, he came home to live with us. School didn't continue, but that last year, not quite a year, but almost a year after he moved back home with us, it was a very painful year for all of us. I'm sure Daniel more than anyone, but I can tell you that the rest of us were in a lot of pain as well. Thankfully, two of his friends had the gumption. I don't know where it came from. Thank God they did. Actually, lifelong friends of his from childhood contacted me because they saw a whole lot more than I did. They didn't have the blinders on that I did. And they opened my eyes. And within 13 days of that phone call, we were very lucky to be put in touch with somebody who put us in touch with somebody who put us in touch with somebody who put us in touch with an interventionist. And we conducted an intervention in our home, and Daniel accepted help. I'm giving you a big spoiler here. You know, in March, he celebrated 10 years of recovery. He hasn't used a drink or drug since that intervention, you know, 10 years ago. So I get choked up every time I tell that piece of the story because I have so much gratitude. So I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to my sweet son.
Wow. Thanks, Mom. And thanks, Troy, for sharing as well. I think I'd like to just start by saying that, I'm not a professional in any way. And I'd just like to share my experience and strength and hope, as we say in a fellowship. And although I may have launched, I'm still deathly afraid of public speaking, even when I'm in a little box. So as my mom said, I've been sober for 10 years now. And I was just trying to think of, who the audience is and, what that like launch age is. And it feels like such a large group of people. It could be from 16 years old in that position or 14 years old. And it could go all the way until, my age at 31, in some cases, I'm sure. So, I mean, and I'm just thinking of that in that part of life and how much can come, how many just pressing issues come from that and the social norms and, being forced into, not forced, but pressured into, hey, if you veer off track at all, it's going to be a lot harder for you. That kind of talk going on in the back of either the parent's head or the child's head. And I also wanted to say that it's risky for my mom to ask me to be on this panel because I'll share some stuff, So yeah, I think I'll just start off in the beginning. As my mom said, the first time that she ever knew that I had smoked weed or had done drugs was when I was 18, and I had started when I was 13. Smoked weed at 13, it was like 7th or 8th grade. And at that point I was doing it really just to fit in. Possibly the same reason I went to college. Was to just fit in and do, and be a part of something and seeking support and seeking emotional support in something other than either my parents or my family or my friends where I didn't feel like I was getting it possibly. So I smoked weed when I was 13 and through high school, I was really, really good at, being a chameleon, fitting in anywhere and saying the right thing and making it all seem like, I was just a normal kid going through high school. But, really what I was doing was I was seeking a solution, seeking either spiritual growth or seeking solace in something other than, human form, which was in my case, drugs and alcohol. I used other drugs throughout high school, like hallucinogens, maybe some cocaine in high school, but not that much, mostly weed and other hallucinogens and things like that. I'm trying to think because, the majority of high school, it was really just building up to this point of going to college. And in high school, I didn't get in too much trouble. There weren't huge consequences because it wasn't getting terribly out of control, and I was able to function and go to high school and show up at class and get average grades. I didn't care too much about my grades, and I think I graduated high school with a 3.0 GPA or something, just to get by and to get into college. And then it came to that point, 11th grade or 12th grade or whatever it is, where everybody starts talking about college. All your friends are talking about where you're going to go and what you're going to do and what are you going to major in and why are you choosing that school? What are you going to do? And it's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of pressure for a child, I think. And I'm sure that everyone knows that. Everybody's kind of been through that. So yeah, I think that at that point, I've been thinking about so much of what I wanted to say, and it's hard to put it all together. I think that, as I was choosing to go to school, I had an idea of what major I wanted, which was architecture, and that was very clear for me. The maturation level, or how mature I was not there. Later on, I would understand that community college was probably the best education that I got, all in all, even graduating last year. I think I'd done 3 semesters of community college, and that was some of the best education that I got with some of the most non-pressured people in my, as peers, that were there for the right reason, or not the right or wrong reason, but the reason, that they chose to be there and they were really excited about it. So I think that at that time, leaving high school at 18, I was really just excited to get away and be somewhere new. I knew 0 people at the University of Arizona, and I think that was a huge detriment. My way of making friends and feeling comfortable was through the use of drugs at that point. And so I met people through that means, which set me up for a pretty devastating career at the University of Arizona. So yeah, the first year I skated by. I got in a bunch of trouble. I got in trouble with the state for a possession charge. And like my mom said, snow plowing, totally exemplified in the situation where, I got off scot-free, hired an attorney, got out of it. The attorney even mentioned to my dad, who's on this call, that, is he going to come back for a second year? Like, you're crazy to send him back for a second year. Somehow I went back for a second year, and it was pretty devastating. Left my second year with a 1.3 GPA, which, as my mom mentioned, would be helpful to say, that stuck with me for a long time, that GPA. So, that second year, if I were to spin the tape back, probably not the best idea, just because it was so consequential to, the next decade, really. So let's see. Yeah, totally dissociative at this time as a person. I was pretty emotionally inept. So at the time, I found solace in drugs and alcohol. So my tolerance for being preached to, or being, seeing an authoritative figure that was going to take that from me or telling me that that was not the right way to do it, since that was the only way I knew how to do it, I knew that it was threatened. When someone was coming at me and asking me or telling me that that was not the right way to do it or something like that, I felt like I was threatened, because if that was pulled from me, then I wouldn't be okay. How am I doing on time? I haven't checked. Okay. Yeah, I think another point I wanted to mention was just, seeking kind of these, external support systems. I never really hooked on or latched on to external support systems. And now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably because my main support system was not a person. And I really, maybe since I was so deep in my ways, I knew that if I were to seek that support system, I already knew what they were going to tell me. A therapist, I already knew what they were going to tell me. And they were going to tell me that I probably, it's probably not healthy to be using as much drugs and alcohol as I was. So that was another piece that was threatening me. Another piece was just the avoidancy in our family dynamic. I think most of all, we were pretty conflict avoidant altogether, and we were all responsible for that. And I think just normalizing the piece of drug use and speaking to that part of this person suffers from drugs and alcohol, and that's okay. They're going to seek help, and this is the way out. And having solutions and normalizing that in conversation, I think could have really benefited me. Let's see. Yeah, so the rest of the story from college, dropped out a year later, got sober through an intervention through 2 dear friends, and then went to like aftercare facilities and treatment facilities, and lived in northeastern Pennsylvania for 2.5, 3 years, and then moved to Colorado. where weed is totally legal since I moved here. Yeah, it's I went back to school through the help of Nancy Clifford, who's also on this call. Shout out. So I went back to school, and I had that 1.3 GPA. Went through community college, and like I said, that was probably the best educational experience that I've had thus far. Even going to 2 major universities to get my GPA up. So I had to jump through these academic hoops to get my GPA up so that I could be admitted into CU Boulder, the University of Colorado, with 18-year-olds. And at the time I was 27. So I had to go to community college for 2 years to get into school with 18-year-olds. So I got into the University of Colorado and graduated last May, and I have a job, I make money, I've launched. Let's see. Yeah, I wanted to maybe just really quick answer that question, one of those questions. That was the top 3 things. I have 6 with the collaboration of my girlfriend. It would have been nice to have known or had some practice with financial pieces in life, and just understanding what it cost to go to school, what was at stake, and my GPA, and all those things. Just understanding the consequences that may come out of dropping out of school. And that's a massive privilege and an opportunity. Remaining teachable and just being curious about, whatever is happening with your child. That there's no right or wrong way to launch. Normalizing the human struggle. So hearing my parents say, like, yeah, that's really hard. I struggle with that too. I think that would have been really, really helpful. External support systems. So like elders in the community, having a really solid community and conversation within that community. And then different ways or methods to regulate the nervous system. Like my mom said, I've had, possibly anxiety disorders and other pieces that, I wasn't familiar with ways that, like healthy ways to regulate my nervous system. And I'm still working on that to this day. And I found that drugs worked really well for that. And they're not sustainable. They're not healthy. So I think that's all I've got. And so I just wanted to share my experience, and thanks everyone.
Thanks so much, Daniel.
Yeah.
I'm such a proud mom. Gotta just say that. So thank you so much. This is, by the way, we don't make a habit of this. This is the first time that we've ever collaborated on a program. He was a panelist of ours when he had 2 years sober, like 8 years ago. So it's been a while. So thanks to Zoom, here we are. All right, Hayden, you're up, buddy. I'm so grateful that you're with us, and I'm really grateful that you work with us as often as you do, and we can always count on you to show up when we ask, so thank you.
That's right. Hi, everybody. I am really grateful to be here. I'm glad to have kind of heard what everyone said before me too, and preparing to launch. It's funny, I was thinking about, so we spoke before about like this saying failure to launch, and we're throwing that away, and now it's preparing to launch. And I was thinking about somewhere, some authority on this type of thing in the last 5 years has announced that adolescence has been protracted to age 24 or something, So we're adolescents till we're 24, and then in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen the appearance of this term emergent adult. The world's really crazy. Social networks are being made so quickly that I'm still really young, and I'm already kind of confused and left in the dust about what kids are doing on their phones. People are doing all this weird new stuff with their nicotine and their marijuana, and I have no idea what is to come. So I just want to validate how, this kind of exponential curve of technological advancement and the speed at which information is transferred all over makes all of parenting and adolescence kind of this new thing. I also, just to introduce myself and a little of my background, I've been doing this stuff with Kim since before I was a clinician at a bunch of different kind of age levels, grade levels, and settings. My background before graduate school was in neurobiology, and now I work at a depression recovery IOP and a substance use recovery house, and I also have a private practice. And I've worked sort of at this direct care level, kind of just hanging out with your kids when they're in their treatment day at various facilities, and now in more of, the fancy chair that I'll model here for you. And the first thing, I want to say thanks to everybody for coming. And I've joked with Kim about it before. When your kid is 8 years old and you're coming to a panel about preparing to launch or marijuana abuse, you're like super mom or super dad, and you're the champion parent who's getting ahead of the game. And, there's this bell curve of, once your kid's getting a little older, it becomes a little bit more anxiety inducing. And so I just want to kind of, honor those of you who show up to these things, even when it might be really uncomfortable. I kind of wrote down a bunch of notes from everybody's shares before me, and I want to just highlight some of the themes that I noticed that I think are really important. So one of the things we heard from Troy and from Daniel and from Kim, as the snowplow mother, was this. Troy and Daniel are saying that you can't be paternalistic is the word that came to mind. And it's even funny to tell a parent you can't be paternalistic because, that word, it comes from, don't be fatherly. So a lot of this stuff is so unnatural. You have this child. And I don't have, full disclosure, I don't have kids, but I have a dog. And when I'm talking about children, I think about my dog, just so you guys know. And that's how I'm going to compare this all. But you have this child. And from the second this child is born, or the second this child comes into your home, you are preparing this child to leave you and kind of not need you and not care about you anymore. And that has its own sort of grieving process that occurs every year from kindergarten, through the final year of adolescence, which is now 24 years old. That's all that stuff is going on behind the scenes for you, before we even get to that question of like, what's going on with my son, what's going on with my daughter, why aren't they doing what I see the other kids doing? Why aren't they doing what I expect other children to be doing? And that kind of leads into this idea of the question, which I really liked, was how do I convey my values without preaching? And I had to think about that one, because I'm at a loss at that point with my dog. I don't have to convey any values to that guy. But and the thing that I thought of and was highlighted in everyone's examples was modeling. And there's one thing to model, like I get up, I go to work, I come home, I participate in society. But it's another thing to model vulnerability, which is what Troy was talking about. Meeting your child where they are. Meeting your immersion adult where they are with vulnerability, showing your child that it's safe to be vulnerable in the world, and that if you get hurt taking a risk being vulnerable, that you'll recover. Another point that I saw with Kim and Daniel was this modeling relationships. So I'm sure Daniel, when he's out there in the game, had a lot of shady relationships, but these important early relationships were the ones that ended up saving Daniel's life, and those friendships, like your kids make early on, or they keep going, like all those things are modeled from, what we see. And all of these things that the parent does, that the parent models, it's like the scaffolding for this new being to grow, And the last thing I want to kind of emphasize is a lot of this, and I also want to say, like, the burden on parents and the continued burden on parents, the more, like, everything we learn about the brain developing, I feel like every day it's like, oh, it turns out that moms and dads have another way in which they can screw up their kid and one less way in which they can, allow their kid to bloom. It's like, it can feel really precarious to be a parent, this idea of kind of modeling and what are you able to tolerate. So, when your kid cries, I have a friend right now who has a baby and they're doing this whole sleep training thing. Again, I don't have kids. It's all brand new to me. I can't believe it, but they're training the baby, but you're training yourself to be able to tolerate one more minute of crying, one more minute of distress. And you continue to kind of expand what you can tolerate as you get older and older. And what that grows into is this ability to allow your kid to fail, you know, to allow your child, your teen, your emergent adult to fail in a way that can lead them to success later on. So Daniel's story, and I feel like I know the whole story because I've heard your mom like mention bits and pieces a bunch of times, but in Daniel's story, you know, we had some small failures early on, and kind of blocking those really put him in more and more of a precarious situation, at least academically, you know, and it can become a bigger failure. You know, practicing failure, you know, strengthening your failing muscle is kind of the best way we can set people up for success. You know, other than that, the last thing I want to say is it's not like every kid is a piece of IKEA furniture and you have exactly the right pieces, and, you know, you rotate your Allen wrench the perfect amount of time and that you get the beautiful piece of furniture that's modeled there. You know, for some kids, you might have to really address this substance use as the primary thing to remove that before you can address stuff, which is often the case. For others, it might be addressing some anxiety, addressing some depression. For others, it might just be addressing kind of this interpersonal intimacy stuff, friendships, and kind of relating in the world that doesn't necessarily fit into these treatment boxes. You know, but being able to come there with vulnerability and being able to model failure, recovering from failure, model tolerating uncertainty is sort of, in my opinion, kind of the best way to find success and really, you know, prepare this kid to launch. And those are the pieces I really wanted to draw out. So thank you guys all.
Thanks so much, Hayden. You reminded me of something. You know, I think I was talking to Troy about this on the phone last week, but there's this amazing pediatrician named Ken Ginsberg. He's out of the Children's Hospital, and his expertise, his very narrow, specific area of expertise is resiliency, fostering childhood resiliency. And we were very honored to have him as a speaker a few years ago. And his full community program is recorded on our YouTube page. It's our most popular video, and it's amazing. And one of the things that he said that I think is so apropos of this topic is, he said that because, at least in this culture, 18 was always the launch, was supposed to be the launch. So, you know, in the in the education system, you know, you're in school until you're roughly 18 years old. So that K through 12 is like preparing you to be 18. 18 is when you're legally an adult. 18 is when you can vote, you know, those kinds of things. So everything in our culture is focused on that as the end point. But he says that really what we should be thinking about is when we're raising our child and we're educating our child is how we're raising and educating a 35-year-old. What will this person be like when they're 35 as a community member? Are they on time for things? Are they financially, as Daniel pointed out, financially capable, at least financially literate, you know, and understanding these things? Do they do community service? Are they truthful and a good neighbor? And these are values. These are things that we can instill, but instead we're so focused on college. And I think that's something that's so relevant to preparing our child to launch is knowing readiness for college. And I would love to kind of put that out there to the group. And also we have some questions coming in, but just let's get started with that a little bit with, I'm going to put us on, there we go, gallery view. So anybody want to talk a little bit about preparedness for college? I guess signs, maybe let's talk about signs that someone is or is not ready for college. Yep, Troy.
Yeah, I mean, of course, one of the normal barometers is what are their grades like as far as regular high school? What are they doing in high school? That's right there. What are their study habits like? You know what I mean? What are they actually doing? Because, you know, school's social, but truly it's very academic. That's what we're actually going there for. That wasn't what I didn't go there for. Like, I mean, to echo something that Daniel said, I'm a person of long-term recovery also. And I went to college at Shrewsbury University, and alcohol was that, like I'm an anxiety person, but alcohol was that thing that just made it easy for me to relate to everybody. I became a total different person. So when Daniel shared that, I was very appreciative for you to show that vulnerability. But I think just to look for the things that any parent normally look for a college student being prepared for. one thing I think is also important, what type of support system do they have now in high school? And are they skilled enough emotionally to make new friends? You know what I mean? Like, look at those signs. Are they ready to go really far away from home? Should they be in community college first? Should they take a gap year? All those different things that some parents think, well, here goes the ego thing again. Oh, I want my child to go to school like every other child in the neighborhood. You can't go there. It's just not fair to the child. It's not. One of the other things too, I think what Kim had mentioned about having a very transparent conversation with a child, a lot of children don't realize when they don't go to school, there's also some shame they put on themselves. You know what I mean? Because Tony, John, Jim, Muhammad, Raheem, whoever, they're away and I'm home. So that's a pressure too. So a parent has to be very supportive of that one on the other side. So I'm hoping I'm answering that question because I think, again, hire someone. You know what I mean? Hire someone to really assess, is this person ready or not? Now, we all know without like being too prescriptive about it, if they have a major substance abuse issue, like Daniel had mentioned, they shouldn't be going to college. That's not the time for them to figure it out. You know what I mean? That is not the time. You want to get that under control first. You follow? You want to get that under control first before they go anywhere. You don't want to have to transfer to a new therapist or find an intensive outpatient somewhere in Harrisburg or Arizona or Kentucky. You want to make sure they have a sound base before they leave the home. All right? Hope that's helpful.
That's great. Hey, Troy, while we have you, here's another question for you. Addicts are typically allergic to ownership. What methods do you use to take that journey toward ownership with them?
I think one of the things, it's really easy in a way of having them accept ownership is task-oriented interventions. Like, can you do this? Can you do that? Like, make it so what's measurable that they have not achieved. Like, a lot of times I'll tell a parent, well, if the child says he's going to have a job by May 5th, the child should have a job by May 5th. One of my sayings I say all the time, accountability prevents consequences, right? You know what I mean? Discipline prevents regret, you know? So hold the child accountable by measurable tasks that are easy, Daniel mentioned balancing a checkbook. There's other ways of holding someone accountable just by measuring the tasks that they do that are life skills that they're going to need later on in life. You know, just find little things that they have to do. Another way too is like, you know, there's support groups out there. There's 12-step programs. There's Smart Recovery, Dharma Recovery. There's different ways of children being held accountable. Another way of being someone holding accountable, not just from a substance abuse perspective, volunteering. You know what I mean? I think volunteering is a great way to have somebody commit to something that they have to do where somebody else is, connected to the outcomes of their behaviors, to show them that I don't live in this world alone, that what I do affects someone, you know? And there's a way a parent can explain that to a child without shaming the child that, hey, you know, that like I worry about you or I lose sleep, you know, there's a way of doing it because, hey, they should know how their substance abuse is not only affecting them, how it's affecting others. Is that helpful? So.
Thanks, Troy. That's great. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? You good? Okay. Here's a question for me. My single biggest mistake in dealing with my son's addiction was, because I made so many, my single biggest mistake with regard to his addiction was denial. You know, I don't know if that's a mistake or if that's just a natural part of parenting, I think is, you know, I often talk about the perfect storm, right? The perfect storm to me means I want to believe you, my son, daughter, whatever, you know, I want to believe that that's not your mom or whatever it might be. You know, I don't want to believe this is what's happening. And you, my, you know, son or daughter needs me to believe you, you know, that you need to keep going. You need to keep having access to, you know, this coping mechanism that you have. So, you know, our loved ones become incredibly good at deflecting, of saying exactly the right thing. You know, his dad and I did a lot of talking with him. We had have some really deep conversations, and then, you know, we would end the conversation and Michael and I'd be like, oh, that went well, right? Well, and then 2 days later, you know, we're like wringing our hands again and worried. So we should have listened more, you know, mentioning a few things that we could do differently. And somebody else asked, what would I do differently with Daniel if I could go back in time? I think I kind of enumerated some of them, just, you know, being more open to hearing what was going on instead. And I share this all the time, and parents who are on this meeting, and you've heard me say it before, but it's brilliant. A dad said this years ago in a support group early on for me. He said, I finally figured out that I was playing my movie on my son's screen. And man, that just like, wow, that was such an aha moment for me. All my expectations, you know, you see your children, they're little, they're playing with Legos. Oh, she's going to be an engineer, you know, or, oh, he's so artistic, or whatever. So we start playing this tape in our heads of what it's going to be, and what I thought was great for me in college. Surely my children will love that. They're my children. And also, what made me think that what prompted my decision to drink or a decision to not drink underage has nothing to do with what my kids are going to decide to do. So I think, you know, like Troy, you brought up the ego, checking my ego and seeing my child for who they really are and who they have the potential to be has nothing to do with what my expectations are. What do they want out of life? You know, what's holding them back from moving on with life and that kind of thing. Yes, Troy, go ahead.
I want to loop back to something. When you were talking, Kim, you made me think of something. Also, when you think about accountability, one of the things that's a byproduct of accountability, task-oriented, measurable goals, is that if they can't complete them, you can also talk to them about why. You know, like, you know, were you oversleeping? Were you out with your friends too much? Like, what's stopping you from getting those goals? And then they kind of like somehow you break down the process of how is this substance or how is this drink holding you back from achieving something as small as cutting the grass? You know what I mean? Going shopping for your little brother, walking the dog when you're supposed to walk the, like you, Hayden, I have 2 dogs. They're my babies. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, what's stopping you from doing those things that you shouldn't be doing, you know? So I just wanted to backtrack about that too.
Great. Daniel, I can see that you see some questions in here. Do you want to, well, I'll ask them for you and then you can answer. So a question to you, once you got clean, what made you feel ready to launch?
I think a big part of that was, you know, my situation was, you know, I left the home, so I wasn't at my parents' home anymore. Once I got sober, I was more on my own and paying rent and things like that. And I think one of the biggest pieces to feeling ready to launch was really just supporting myself financially, and then also, you know, realizing that it was on me to make the choices. I didn't have a snowplow anymore, so things that were coming at me, they were hitting me a little harder, and I could feel them more. So before I got sober, I would kind of drown those things out. And so some of that disassociative nature that I had before I was sober, I was feeling those impacts more. And so each time I got hit by something like that, I could feel that. And I think that was, at that point, I was understanding what was coming at me, which was life. And it was coming at me fast. And I think that was the point where, you know, like Hayden said, the other piece to, you know, that launching was relationships. And I think relationships with friends, people that I got sober with, that I'm still friends with today, are a huge, huge piece of that. And I think that that's probably the thing I'm most grateful for in life. And I find to be the most important thing in my life is human relationships. So I think that's what made me feel ready to launch, was knowing that, you know, I had this support through friends, and also feeling all the things that were impacting me.
Great. I love this. I'm curious about modeling honesty / open communication by the parents from a young age with the children. If my assumption is correct that this is beneficial, what are some of the boundaries around what you share or what you don't share as a parent to your child? And I'll just touch on this briefly, and if anyone else wants to chime in, please do. This comes up when we talk with parents a lot, and we actually have a handout at our events that we usually have available, and it's very popular. The title is How to Talk to Your Kids About Drugs If You Did Drugs. And basically the summary of this article is be honest, but you do not have to get into the details. And the honesty piece can look like, you know, I was a kid, I didn't have my fully developed frontal lobe yet, so I made a lot of choices that today I wouldn't have made. Or maybe that's not the case. Maybe the reality is that you chose not to use substances at all. But whatever the truth is, we need to be honest, and of course gauging their age. So if they're very young, there's so many ways, and we have a program specifically for those K-5 parents. Hayden's been a part of that program. And I love that opportunity to talk really young with kids about family members who, you know, helping them with language to use about a family member so that there's no judgment. It's loving, supportive, you know, but we can be honest about it because they're so much more savvy than we give them credit for a lot of the time. They can see when somebody's behavior is upsetting them and it doesn't feel right. So talking about it early in a very non-judgmental way, not using negative words like train wreck or any of that kind of stuff. Absolutely not. But anybody else want to say anything about that? Yep, Troy. Troy,
Yeah,
then Hayden.
I think everything you said makes sure. I said you got to be really careful on what you do disclose, but always be honest. You can't ask someone to be honest if you're not being honest, you know? And one of the things that I want to echo, and like, I think I didn't talk about this earlier. I've seen this happen a lot of times where a parent or parents are asking a child to stop using and they have a substance abuse issue themselves. You know what I mean? Like, that's major. And so, you know, if you're out there and this is one of your issues too, get help, because you can't be like, you can't sit there and drink abusively or use drugs abusively and expect your child to actually listen to you. You know, you're trying to set a boundary in a healthy way, but what are your own personal boundaries? And I'm not saying this accusatory, but I've seen this happen numerous times because I've even asked parents, you know, maybe we should talk about your drinking, or maybe we should talk about because the child sees that. And, you know, like, you know, there's a way of drinking responsibly and you have to model that too. You know what I mean? You have to model that. So because you said to Kim perfectly, you know, you don't want them to think, where are they going to be when they're 50, 30, 35, whatever. What are you modeling as an adult, you know? Because then they'll start to assume, well, maybe I'll drink like that when later on, you know? So I just want to put that out there too.
Thanks, Troy. Go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, so I agree with what both Troy and Kim said. And I also want to, you know, in an ideal world, in my ideal child development world that exists somewhere, I think about a kid, every question they have, we have the time to be thoughtful and give them a response that's perfectly appropriate and we'll, you know, describe as much as they can understand. But, you know, this stuff's not the case. You might get a question like that on your way, you know, out the door and things like that. And the second thing I want to say is, you know, when we talk about being like honest and being vulnerable, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, yes, you know, yes, son, when I was, you know, a kid, I smoked marijuana every weekend with my friends and I love, you know, it can take the form of something like, you know what, Daniel, can I consult with your mother and get back to you about this because I'm nervous about what to say and I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Or it might be like, you know, give me some time to think about how to say this, or, you know, or just kind of full honesty and authenticity about like what you're feeling in that moment. Be like, wow, I don't know how to talk to you. And then kind of dealing with like, you know, your reaction to things. We all can think of the mother or the father, it might be ourselves, who goes, you know, when they hear stuff like that, but just being ready, because the kid, you know, these kids pick up when, you know, they might not be able to label it, but any age, a kid, you know, can tell when you're throwing them for a loop.
Yeah, and two quick follow-up thoughts on that. One is ask questions as well. Like, why do you think people like to use drugs and alcohol? Why do you think that might be something that somebody might want to use or try to do? Have you ever thought about that and what that might feel like? And another one is, probably one of the most popular acronyms in my rooms is the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? You know, because we, as Hayden said, sometimes it's not the right time. We get flustered. We think we have to answer it immediately because that fear strikes us like, oh my God, I gotta shut this down. What are you thinking about getting high? You know, wait, think about this a minute. Think about a thoughtful answer. And you can say, I'll get back to you later. You know, I'm not focused right now. And that's a really great question. And I'd love for us to have a conversation about it later. So yeah, a couple of things there. Oh, Hayden, question for you. Does life does life put the addict there, or does the addict put the addict there? The disease of addiction. Are you understanding that question?
Yeah, so the question, to repeat what I understand it to be, is does life put the addict in the situation, or does the addict put themselves in the situation that, you know, they arrive in at age 15 to 25 when they're preparing to launch, just to keep it, you know, focused in our theme here. And I'm going to give you the annoying answer, which is that it's both. You know, like for all intents and purposes, looking at the causes, we could do a whole other webinar about the biology and the psychological factors and sort of, you know, the family systems that might bring someone to that place. Everyone has a different sort of capacity to get there, but in terms of helping this person go forward and preparing this person to launch, only the addict can put themselves, you know, forward. So it almost only the addict, like the healing for that person only begins when they can take responsibility for the whole thing, regardless of, you know, where it came from. Good question.
Really good question. Daniel, do you want to take that next one? Do you see that? What ways have you found that help regulate your nervous system? My child has sensory sensitivity and a mood disorder, and food is their drug of choice.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think the ways that I use today, and these have kind of shifted over the 10 years of being sober. I think in the beginning, you know, it was like laughing with friends, smoking cigarettes, you know, hanging out with friends, and being around people that I knew could support me. And I think that's probably one of the bigger ones today, is surrounding myself with people that I can be vulnerable with and people that can support me. Let's say I'm out at any sort of event, party, concert, social distancing, yard hangout. You know, being around those people and, you know, being able to go to them when I'm feeling comfortable is really helpful for me today. I am, you know, I still use nicotine. This is a practice of honesty. Still using nicotine to this day in a form of a lozenge. So it's a really sneaky way for me to self-regulate. I have plans to quit tomorrow on my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. So tomorrow I'm hoping to quit nicotine for the first time since I was probably like 18. So I'm going to be learning this question with you as of tomorrow. I practice some forms of meditation, getting outside regularly, and running, walking. I can use food sometimes too. So in terms of healthy, I think it's just all moderation. And that can be really, really hard for someone like me or whoever else. So learning to practice all these suggestions in moderation, I think, is the key.
Yes, Troy.
I'm a big proponent of yoga. I'm a yoga instructor in Center City, Philadelphia. When I got sober, believe it or not, I practice yoga almost every day. One, it builds a great source of healthy community. There's no keg of beer at a yoga studio. You know what I mean? There's like people there trying to get healthy and live healthy lives. And also there's so many levels to the physical and the mental and emotional components of it. Like yoga's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Why? Because it works. You know what I mean? Doesn't cure everything, does not. But I'm a big proponent of having people try a yoga practice, a meditation practice, and different ways of regulating their emotions and how they feel about certain things. Seen great results from a lot of people suggesting it. So that's another thing. One thing real quick I wanted to mention too, we're talking about talking to our sons and daughters in different ways and making these type of mild family interventions. One of the easiest things I think that parents could do or don't do with the problem child, I don't mean the actual problem child, but the child that you think has a problem, why not just spend some quality time with that child? Just say, hey, you know what? Let's go to the movies. Let's go for a hike. Let's drive to this restaurant. Let's do this, and not talk about anything heavy. Just spend some quality time, not being the heavy all the time, and you'll be surprised on what could happen. I've got great reports of parents, sons and daughters, moms and dads opening up to one another just over like a meal or just over a hike or a walk or something like that. But not even with any type of agenda, like I want to talk to you, but just spending some quality time with your son or daughter, separate from all the other siblings, separate from mom or dad or whoever, just one parent, one child at a different time. That's very, very helpful, you know? So just wanted to put that out there.
Love that. And also to the child who is not the focus of the concern, giving them some love too, because I think we have those lost children for sure who can sometimes, you know, kind of feel the pain of the focus all being on the person that we are most, you know, concerned about at any given time. Hayden, did you have something you wanted to share on that? No, you're good. Okay. So question 4, they're asking if one of the panelists could comment on early developmental stages and using substances. Failure to launch may be due to missing developmental milestones, which is a great question. Hayden.
Unmuted. I think the first thing, I think there's a ton of different, you know, data and kind of developmental theories about why we turn into the adults or the teenagers that we do, you know. And I'll start with the bottom line kind of data thing, with all the collective data about people who develop a substance use issue or, you know, any kind of really addictive or process addiction. When the earlier they start, the more likely they are to develop it. You know, so one kind of intervention I can think of there is just sort of starting all this stuff as early as possible, keeping an eye on it. In terms of developmental milestones, I like to think of it, there's actually this guy, Dan Siegel, wrote a book called Interpersonal Neurobiology, which is it's not necessarily something that I would recommend you read unless you're interested in it. But thinking about kind of interpersonal milestones rather than kind of individual milestones. When am I walking? When am I talking? When am I making friends? When am I starting a date? Is sort of is your child kind of being socially precocious or not? Not that one is better than the other, but kind of keeping an eye on them and keeping an eye on their experiences. I think one of the things that can happen, and sorry about that, guys. One of the things that can happen is, like, you know, from Kim's perspective, we had this question about Daniel that was like, what's going on? I found a pipe in my son's, you know, suitcase. Meanwhile, we heard Daniel's really complex story about not really much to do with the substance use, you know what I mean, about kind of his experiences as a kid trying to fit in. And I think that's a universal thing. So I don't know, when I think about the developmental milestones and missing them, I think that it really, we have to listen to our kids to see like what's super important to them, you know, like what experiences were really salient, you know, like what experiences made them especially excited, or what experiences made them feel humiliated necessarily that you'd have no idea because, you know, we're all, our brains are all developed and we're adults and whatnot. So I hope that answers at least part of that question.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add something to what both Hayden and Troy were just saying too. You know, I love the idea of meditation and yoga and that sort of thing. And we can start that so early. And we have another program where we talk about technology and isolation with teens. And one of the things that we love to share is modeling this for our kids, like to say, you know, I have been on this thing all day long, or my laptop, whatever, all day long. I got to go take a walk. Do you want to come with me? Or, you know, I'm feeling so anxious, or I'm really tired. I think I need to take a nap, you know, like just expressing self-care, expressing healthy coping mechanisms. That's why I love it when we have parents whose kids are really young. And I've said this before, I don't know if I would have gone to one of our programs when my kids were young because I didn't think there was a problem, but my God, there's so much we can do to prevent these kinds of things from even coming up. So learning that really early on. Go ahead, Troy.
And one of the things that I want to talk about, what you just mentioned too, right now, based on the pandemic, we have access to so many things via the web. You can take a yoga class at home if you have social anxiety and you're afraid of going to a yoga class. A whole family can do that. There's tons of free classes. There's ones you can pay for. You can take a class from a teacher in Europe, from California, anywhere. Certain clothing companies, certain sneaker companies are putting out classes. So where the meditation, we've transitioned as humans to using this computer a lot more in the last 3 months. So it's a lot easier now to get somebody to buy into taking a class online than it has been prior to March. So, you know, you can kind of say, hey, look, you can find them for them. So keep that in mind. It's a lot easier now if somebody doesn't even have the financial means to get to a yoga studio, because yoga can be very expensive, right? You know, you can find it all online right now, very much so, especially right now,
Okay, big plug for Yoga with Adriene. I've been practicing with Adriene for 5 years now, I think. I mean, she's got a huge number of followers online. I am not at Troy's level, but I love my yoga, and it's so essential to my day every day. And so yeah, Yoga with Adriene, totally free on YouTube. Millions of followers. All right. I don't think we have any more questions in the queue. I think that we got to everything that was asked previously. Any final thoughts from anybody? Go ahead, Troy.
I just want to say, Daniel, it was just amazing hearing you publicly share what you had to share, especially being a person themselves in long-term recovery. There's a stigma that's connected with that for a lot of people. And I think you modeling that right now gives a lot of people hope, gives a lot of parents hope. It gives me hope. So I just want to say, Daniel, I'm impressed, you know, and I think you did it not just because for your mom. I think you did it for yourself. I think you did it for the community. I think you did it for a lot of reasons. So I got to really give you a big applause on that one. I really appreciate that, you know.
Thanks, Troy. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think I'd like to share just quickly. Yeah, I mean, just through the trajectory of since, you know, that turbulent time at 19, 20, 21 years old, going through the University of Colorado and graduating last May. You know, I graduated with a 3.9, and, you know, knew all of my peers, knew all of my instructors. I was there on a mission. Went there on my own will. I didn't get any pressure from my peers. I didn't get any pressure from my family or my parents or anyone. And it was honestly, you know, my own will and a little help from Nancy Clifford. And so I think, you know, that is worth mentioning, that, you know, I'm so grateful that I went through it the time that I did. And I say that to this day. People say, oh, you know, when I was in school, people would say, oh, it's never too late to go back. And, you know, I would say that I wasn't going back, you know, and it's just like this conception, you know, and I'm just so thankful that I went through it the time that I did. I'm really happy today. I've got a lot of really close friends today that I love, and I would have never met if it wasn't for the path that I was on. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that, and thanks for having me on here, Mom, and it was great to meet everyone.
Awesome. Wow. Well, thanks all of you so much. My heart is full. I can't imagine any better panel than this. So thank you, if I do say so myself, there with my son on the panel. I'm really proud of all of you. I'm happy to have you with us. And so come back next week for clearing the air, and we'll talk about vaping and all that. And maybe Daniel will be a week off of nicotine by then. Who knows? He did stop smoking and vaping though. Yay. That's very good news. All right. Thank you all so very much. Don't forget to take the survey when this closes. It'll pop up on your screen. Really grateful to have all of you with us. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.